Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, I promised to, first of all, get you out on time. I know we're backed up against lunch here, and I do want to leave some opportunity for some questions. As Matt mentioned, my role in our organization is to support you at the local and state level. Our particular company actually assists clients around the country preparing for and responding to and recovering from disasters. And specifically, the function that I play is primarily in the debris management arena. And so what I'm going to do today here is to introduce some of the common themes, kind of do a debris management 101. Take the things that Barry had discussed earlier relative to planning and organizing and how they apply to some of the photographs that he shared from the state of New Jersey, across the state from the Jersey Shore all the way to the Raritan River and some of the waterway debris that the state faced. I'm going to talk about why we need to plan for debris management and show you some of the reasons why I think it's important, why a lot of communities around the country have taken a more progressive approach to preparing for debris management, or proactive rather, and then some common debris management strategies, kind of walk you through that process, what you might be facing, and then how do we organize and plan for it, and then again leaving time for Q&A. So, I want to first, one of the things I see a lot of the presentations say, how big is big, how bad is bad. Some of the photographs that were shared earlier really provide that perspective. And one of the things I've tried to do is, the debris from Hurricane Katrina could fill Lincoln Financial Field X number of times, or the debris from Hurricane Superstorm Sandy could span the globe 17 or 18 times. Debris from Hurricane Ike or from an ice storm could stretch across the country from coast to coast 47 times, or reach to the moon, but I like this guy. I was thinking about it this morning. And everybody's got DVR, TiVo now, and flips through the commercials, but I gotta tell you, I stopped for this guy. The State Farm, I think, is the commercial, and it's mayhem, okay? And if you aren't prepared for this guy could show up with his bears or with the stuff he throws out of the tailgating, blows up the tailgating. It certainly could be mayhem. And why we're here, why I'm going to introduce some of these concepts is to really focus on how you can be better prepared and what actions you may be called on to participate or lead, for that matter, after a debris generating event. So again, what can you expect when you're expecting the next disaster, that is. Walk through some of the elements of the debris management planning process, and then some of the operational pitfalls. Certainly, I am not infallible. I can make mistakes, but one thing I vow to do is never make the same mistake twice, or at least try to avoid that. So I want to share some of those war stories with you, and how you as local governments can work together to plan for these disasters. So why plan for debris management? Honestly, it's where do you begin? I mean, that's why I plan for it, because I actually took that picture in Joplin, Missouri, that was following the tornado there, and honest to God, other than starting a bulldozer from one end of the city and just moving it to the other end of the city, that was my plan. Or at least a plan that sounded good to me when you're facing this. Or something like this from Hurricane Katrina, when you have that many houses. It's just trying to get your arms wrapped around, and saying from our state director down in Texas is, plan for how big is big and how bad is bad. That's what goes through my mind. Next thing, other than just knowing where you're going to go next, is cost. And this is a statistic. I am a bit of a disaster junkie. I read reports that the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General puts out. And this is an actual report from 2010 where they documented the cost that the federal government has spent on debris management operations since the year 2000. So over a 10-year period, the federal government spent $8 billion on debris operations. That's just the federal cost share. For those of you who are familiar with the FEMA public assistance process, there's a local component to this as well. So that might reflect 75% of a much, 75%, 8 billion could be 75%, so a much bigger number there. And again, if you look at those years where it spiked, 2005, 2006, and 2009, those were the years after the very large hurricanes from that year. So in 04 was the Florida storms, 05 Katrina, so it was reflected in 06 and 09. It was Hurricane Ike, which impacted my hometown of Houston, Texas. So again, why plan for it is because it's costly. Obviously, there's other reasons to plan for this as well. Reducing the impact to the landfills in the region, contributing to the economic recovery, getting those tourist destinations reopened, and reentry for the communities and the residents to come back to, certainly addressing the debris. Planning for this because certainly it has an additional wear and tear on your roads because of the number of trucks that are going to be deployed to an area, all obviously imminent threat to public health and safety, and then the documentation. There's going to be a major theme through this whole presentation. I'm sure you might have heard it in the previous presentation, is you have to paint that picture, a documentation of what is going on. Hurricane Ike, I learned what a terabyte of data was, because that's how much information went into documenting the debris operation for the city of Houston. I now fully expect 6 years later that whatever comes after a terabyte of data, is zillabyte or I'm not sure, but it is going to be necessary, because that's really, you're the young lady in the back speaking about photographs and video and all those sorts of things, and that's where we're at, and it's because of the cost that documentation is necessary. So again, planning for these is extremely important. Another reason is, again, financially driven, and it is the fact that FEMA has introduced a public assistance alternate procedures program. This was an outcome of the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act, where debris removal operations, now, if you clean it up faster, there is a federal incentive to do that. So debris collected in that first 30 days is at an 85% federal cost share. And that's really, really important because, in my opinion, this is John Buri speaking here, that the days of FEMA and 100% federal reimbursement for debris costs are over. The stuff you saw, or you may have heard about in Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Ike, where FEMA came in and footed the bill for the entire debris removal operation, it's no mas. In Hurricane Sandy, it's only 90%. All right, so you think a storm as big and voracious as that storm, you would have seen increased federal cost share incentive to that 100% federal participation. That's not the case. So you have to plan for, you're going to have some skin in the game. You're going to have some cost where you as a local government are going to be picking some of this up. So understanding the FEMA Public Assistance Alternate Procedures Program is critical. Some other elements to that program, and I encourage you to go look it up. It's a Google search away. There are 4 elements. The increased federal cost share, recycling, where you're able to retain recycling benefits from the debris, straight time for force account labor. Previous to this particular program, it was only overtime for your staff that was eligible for reimbursement. Now, under this program, you have all of your time. So all of your time for your staff addressing debris will be eligible for reimbursement. And then finally, if you put a plan together, you have an ability to have an extra 2% of federal cost share incentive tacked on to your reimbursement. So, anybody, 2% of a big number has always been told to me is a big number. So 2%, so now what you're looking at, if you plan and can address debris very quickly, you have an opportunity to receive 85% plus another 2%, so that's 87% federal cost share, thus reducing the financial impact to your community. So that is why debris planning is important to me, and I hope you consider it the same for you. So I have some case studies here. I actually, when we were talking, I wanted to get some statistics that I had on the borough of Sayreville, and this is for a 30-day period of performance from and using the contractor Ashbrit. And unfortunately, there's an error on the total cubic yards. It was actually 127,000 cubic yards of debris. I'm not sure why that's not showing up there, but a borough that has approximately 43,000 people, roughly 12,000 households, 13,000 households, would yield 126,000 cubic yards of debris that their contractor picked up. And if you looked at it, a lot of the operational time is over about a 2-week period there, and that comes out from a planning perspective to approximately 7.5 cubic yards per household. So when you do some of your debris forecasting, what might be seen in your particular community, utilizing some of those planning statistics, I usually go with 5 to 10 cubic yards a household is a good barometer for what you might see. And certainly in storm surge type of scenarios, that particular metric can be driven way up. I've seen it as much as 30, 40, 50 cubic yards per household, but just for, again, planning purposes, it may be a good range for you to look at. Another reason to plan is certainly fraud. There's opportunity for fraud in disaster operations. This is an article from the Gulfport Sun following Hurricane Katrina, where some folks that were out there documenting the operation took bribes from the debris contractor, and those 3 individuals faced up to 5 years in prison and fines of $250,000. So certainly there's opportunities for fraud, so you have to have some of those safeguards in place, and you have to look at your risk and what's out there. Another case study is a recent one in South Carolina and Georgia following Winter Storm Pax, and I must have missed it when they started naming winter storms now, but I guess they do. I saw there's a Winter Storm Zephyr going on right now, but Winter Storm Pax actually impacted an area of South Carolina whose main threat from a risk and vulnerability perspective was hurricanes. And they had a really bad ice storm, a little bit worse than the one that impacted the region here, left upwards of 1 inch of ice on the trees there, and generated millions of cubic yards of debris in a heavily vegetated area, much like the area that you live in now. So the purpose of this is to demonstrate to you it's not just your hurricanes that you need to plan for, but it's your ice storms as well that can really impact an area. Also, the state of Connecticut, someone that we work with as well, they were planning for the big hurricane scenario, and Winter Storm Alfred in 2011 left millions without power for several weeks actually, and generated millions of cubic yards of debris across the state there. So you got to be versatile with your planning assumptions to look at what might impact your area. And then the final case study is again from my hometown in Houston, where we were impacted by Hurricane Ike, September 11th and 12th and 13th of 2008. What I want to show you is that it's 2014, and they're still going on. They're still undergoing audits right now. So those of you who have Sandy related reimbursements, or Irene, or Lee, or any other particular disaster, it ain't over anytime soon. And that's what I want to communicate to you, that many communities have still not been made whole from their disaster reimbursement because closeout has not occurred yet. And because of staff turnover or changes, there's been lost and misplaced documentation. I get questions about every other week. Where's this piece of documentation? Why did something like this occur? Folks, I can't remember what I did last week, much less 6 years ago. And so you've got to have that documentation that tells that story. Have it electronically, hard copy, etched in stone, reduce it to paper, keep your emails, because, and what's funny is that the auditors, I'm fairly certain were sophomores in high school when Hurricane hit. No offense to them, but that they're junior staff and they're asking these questions, and certainly one of the things I always say is decisions you make on day one are going to be questioned on day 1001, and so you have to be prepared for that. So the next part of the presentation I'm going to focus on is more of the how. More of the how you get from point A to point B, how you get from, a picture like I showed with Joplin, Missouri, to, again, final outcome where a lot of areas in New Jersey have recovered, and that's what we want to focus on now. So, again, I look at this as a timeline perspective, and really it's identifying that risk, whether it's a tropical tropical-based threat where you do have that opportunity for several days, or whether it's a no-notice incident, whether it's a tornado or a winter storm where you get perhaps an hour or 12 or 24 hours to plan for the disaster. You've got to take that into consideration and be flexible. Once that disaster impacts, it's not only imperative that you begin with your road clearing activities, but it's planning for that phase 2. It's always planning for that next operational period and the next 24 days, 24 months, at 24 hours out. So once the disaster strikes, one thing I'll say is that call for action to address the debris is going to be nearly immediate. One thing I saw after Winter Storm Pax is social media, tweeting pictures, photographs out there, asking questions, when are people going to come and collect my debris? People are really driving the information out there, and that's going to start from your elected officials. Obviously, these are health and safety risks, but those questions are going to be asked immediately. And so, again, as I mentioned, day 1 to day 301, you're going to be certainly criticized. I mean, you think it's bad after an Eagles game on Monday when people are playing Monday morning quarterbacks, or a Texans game, where I come from. People are certainly going to be ruthless about some of the criticism. I mean, you obviously have seen, if you haven't, I'm familiar with the criticism that was placed on, the state of New Jersey with what they did following Superstorm Sandy and Governor Christie. But I can also tell you that there is also a Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General report findings that said that the governor did not do anything wrong with how they responded to debris operations. So, but certainly those questions are going to be there. As I mentioned before, emergency roadway clearing activities is going to be that first phase, and certainly that's the folks out there that are turning the wrenches. It's critical that those things happen immediately, but what's more critical, or just as important, is planning. And I'm sorry this didn't come out all that well, but you've got to start deciding on your debris removal method, what best meets the need of your community. And you've got to look at this from a multifaceted approach. You've got to have that team around you to discuss, what are the public health and welfare issues out there? Are there any rotting meats, or are there any environmental hazards that must be addressed immediately? What's the composition of debris? Is this just a vegetative debris incident, or is there construction and demolition? Is there waterways? Is there abandoned vehicles? What are we going to have to deal with? Estimated amount of time. Do you have 30 days? Do you have 4 weeks, 6 weeks? What are the needs of your community? How widespread is this? Is this a tornado that took a very clear and concise path, and you walk 2 blocks away and their house is fine? Or is this a storm surge type of incident where the banks of the river swelled up and you have some serious flooding throughout a large area? What's the damage to the transit routes? What impact do you have to the transportation facilities that may limit your ability to reach some of these areas. What's the cost? Have you started putting some back of the cocktail napkin numbers together? Base things on $20 per cubic yard to dispose of debris. Or $10, $20, $25, $30 per cubic yard. Have you run some of those estimates? And no action. I've seen it before where there's been some communities, it was in rural Oklahoma, they sat there in city council and they said, the debris after an ice storm, not our problem. The residents can do what they will. They're going to turn it into firewood. We're not going to. They've made a statement. They took a position. Hey, it is what it is there in rural Oklahoma, but it certainly was their issue, and it might not be politically palatable for your community. So you got to make those decisions. And when's the presidential disaster declaration going to come? Certainly not soon enough for a lot of people, including myself, to hear, hey, there's been a major disaster declaration for public assistance. When is the debris removal operation going to get started? Which again, all impact your debris removal method. And then finally, what is your collection strategy? Are you going to rely upon the federal government to, like some areas in New York did, for a Corps of Engineers mission assignment, where they activated their advanced contract initiative contractors to address debris in some areas of New York? Or is it going to be state assistance? What New Jersey did, which was engage a national contractor, multiple contractors, and provide that contract vehicle to communities across the country? Or are you going to be looking at this from a local perspective, where you as a local government are going to have to engage a contractor, or you're going to do it with your own staff to address the debris on your own? These are certainly questions that, again, need to be discussed, and hopefully you can do it beforehand versus in the aftermath of an incident. From a program and project management perspective, again, looking at debris estimation cost models, putting those not to exceeds in place, critical piece of this. Coming up with your operational plans, your work plans. Again, cornerstone of incident command, ICS, is your mobilization. When you're mobilizing, you've got to be looking at your demobilization day as well. That needs to be establishing those end dates, because certainly I am guilty of it as well. One of the things I do the best is procrastinate, and that is probably from a public perspective certainly something that we see a lot of. You got to prepare those requests for information, requests for public assistance, or RPAs. Coming up with press releases, and not only the messaging but the medium as well. Coming up with your daily meeting schedule. Make it, again, we had in Augusta, Georgia a couple of weeks ago, daily meetings, 2 p.m. every single day. Everybody knew there. As Barry mentioned, making it 1 hour. Everybody knows when to come and when it's going to be complete, but you have to have that coordination. And a lot of times mid-afternoon is a good opportunity, especially in the morning when people are trying to get the trucks out, focused on that. That might be a good time for your community. And then identifying who your management team. One of the things I can't stress enough is that you have to be involved. If you have a contractor or you have an idea where you're going to turn the keys over to them, and it's like Ron Popeil say, set it and forget it, you are mistaken. You have to stay involved and stay engaged. You may not be out there, turning the wrenches, picking up the debris, getting up in the debris tower, but you are certainly a part of your recovery. As I mentioned before, debris management communication strategies have to happen early and often. You've got to find your best method and mechanism to communicate to the public how you are addressing your debris for your community. One of the things I see quite often is in densely populated areas specifically is that people hear something on the local news station and they assume that that's going to happen for their community as well. Especially in recovery, again, something might happen in the city over or the town over might not be how your community is addressing it. You might be looking at a different way of debris collection strategy. So getting that messaging out, whether it's through a reverse 911. Some people have apps on their phone. Every town or borough seems to have a new Facebook page or Twitter account. Utilizing those mediums and knowing the rules for social media to get that message out to the public. So from an operations perspective, a lot of people utilize, for small events, utilize neighborhood drop-off, citizen collection stations, roll-offs, whatever it is. That people don't want to have a curbside collection program. Okay? There's certainly a place for this. But I will tell you that it's generally speaking, for isolated incidents where I've seen it work the best, isolated incidents, smaller areas where you've got a controlled perimeter. Yes, it is FEMA reimbursable activity, but please don't be mistaken that the documentation requirement for this is any less. You've got to have that documentation as to who came in your site, where the debris went, how often it was picked up, how was your contract competitively procured, all those sorts of elements that have to go into this. So certainly this is an option for you to explore. What is the most common, and I'd say 99% of the debris operations that I see out there are utilizing a right-of-way debris removal program. And again, where you have a curbside collection and separated this actually out of the Times-Picayune, and where you've got debris placed along the right-of-way. Not only does that demonstrate what the right-of-way is, but it's showing that source separation, because if you do have an opportunity to recycle or divert waste from your landfill, it happens at the curb. There's certainly an opportunity to do it at the debris management site, but to do it at the curb, it's a lot cleaner and a lot more effective. So again, recognizing the right-of-way, again, whether you're in an urban area, the right-of-way to the sidewalk, or in a rural area, you might be looking at power poles or your tree line. Those are some ways of recognizing the right-of-way, and that's where the debris operation starts. And I also say that's where 95% of your costs are going to be as well. So again, this is a picture of a truck that just left the Monster Garage or something along those lines. You look at the tandem. Tandem trailer. It's actually got a pup trailer on it. You can see it's a self-loading vehicle. This is actually taken in Pensacola Beach following Hurricane Ivan several years ago. But that's a lot of debris that was generated from the disaster, and again, it's that sand and C&D and just mix of stuff that you see after a disaster. One of the things I also want to, just again, when you're planning for this, is that it's certainly not a one sweep of the community. You can want that, but to be realistic about things, that these often take multiple sweeps. This often takes several trips throughout the community for you actually to collect all the debris. This is actually a photograph of the debris management site. We heard about those a little bit. Our TDSRS's, temporary debris storage and reduction site. The goal is to get as many trucks out there in a shorter period of time and take it to an area. It may not be a landfill, but it's certainly an area where you can stage it and then evaluate your options about how to dispose of it. This is actually a field. This is day one, if you can see it. This is probably, I think it was about a 15-20 acre site. It had good ingress and egress, some things to look for. And I know we've got a presentation that's going to be discussing disposal in a few minutes, but it has a temporary road that was built here, probably some soil stabilization, throwing some wood chips down to get that site up and running. This is day 3, where you've got a nice little veg pile there. You can see the backhoe there. You can see the dozer here managing the pile. And obviously on day 14, You can see how that pile has grown immensely in a tiered fashion. And I mean, again, when you're looking at it from a planning perspective, the question was asked, what can you do immediately to plan for a debris generating event? I would say this is probably 1 or 1A, identifying debris sites and reviewing those on an annual basis. Again, identifying that 15, 20 acre, and maybe as small as a 5 acre tract of land that's open, that's not in a floodway or a floodplain or flood anything. It's certainly an option for you to start planning for now. Again, we talked about documentation, and a lot of times if you engage a contractor, they'll have what you call a load ticketing process. This could be either a manual process or through a paper ticket, where each one of these loads has to be graded. So what you'll do is essentially you'll measure the volumetric capacity of this truck, then you'll fill the truck, you'll bring it by that load or that inspection tower, and then you'll grade the load. You'll actually determine, or you or your contractor is going to determine how full that load is. And that multiplied by your rate in your contract is how you determine how much you're going to pay for that particular load of debris. Certainly, these trucks, the truckloads of debris can get very expensive, and so you have to treat this documentation like gold, because that is certainly part of their paycheck. Debris is unloaded at the staging area, and I'm sorry, I don't know why it's flipping on me like this, but appreciate your patience here. Debris is unloaded at the staging area, and this is where health and safety has to be on the top of everybody's checklist throughout the debris operation. Proper personal protective equipment in the field, as well as at these debris sites, because folks, I have seen those trucks that have their fully extended dump bodies blown over plenty of times in a windy type of environment as they're unloading the massive amounts of vegetative debris at the debris site. Again, the debris stockpile, and you have to manage it, whether that's windrowing it, involve your fire marshal, involve your notify police fire that this operation is going on, because there is certainly, as many debris sites as I've seen, is as many debris site fires as I've seen as well. So again, you've got to make contingency plans for this type of operations. Then, identifying landfill, recycling and diversion strategies. In the city of Houston, they partnered with a couple of local mulch recyclers, and that's where they took most of their vegetative woody debris. Paper mills was another option. Landfill vegetation, slope stabilization, where they're taking the wood chips. Most of the C&D had to be landfilled. The white goods could obviously be diverted. But I will say this, is that when you do start planning for this, there are certainly phone calls that you are going to get with too good to be true offers. Hey, we're going to pay $10 a cubic yard for that debris. And all you have to do is sign to the dotted line here. Well, folks, it's your responsibility to take this debris from cradle to grave. And if that particular vendor that you signed the too good to be true deal with goes belly up, hey folks, it's on you. And whether that is loading it on barges and taking the debris overseas, which I've seen that done, I've seen it taken to Italy, which was a legitimate operation, to loading it on a rail car and sending it to Minnesota, which became an economically unfeasible option, and for that client, it ended up being more of a burden than it was initially. There's the reduction options, a reduction via air curtain incinerators, and I encourage you to review a document like FEMA 325. There's a lot of good material out there that shows you some of your disposal options. There's reducing versus chipping and grinding, where you have some of these big tub grinders that can really eat through or chew through a lot of vegetative debris in a very short period of time. I've also seen some C&D grinders, which I've seen used with mixed results. So there's certainly some options out there for you to look at. The final thing I wanted to show you was an operation is just the what if. The what if that's out there where you've got your right-of-way collection, but you certainly have all those other elements of the operation that you may have to address. Probably the most expensive and the most common is the leaner, hanger, and stump. It's kind of like lions, tigers, and bears, but leaders, hangers, and stumps go together. That's any sort of tree work, cut work that has to occur after a disaster, and the documentation that goes with it. Because if you do look at the FEMA 329 document, it shows you that you have to have a photograph before, a photograph of the hazard, and a photograph of the tree after the hazard was removed. So that's 3 photographs per one tree that you worked on. That's how you get the terabytes or petabytes or whatever bytes, zilobytes of data that you have for these disasters. Marine debris removal using side scan sonar, other methods of removing submerged hazards from navigable waterways, shallow water debris removal, parks and recreational area debris removal, white goods. That's a photograph from Lake Charles, Louisiana, following Hurricane Rita in 2009. And I wish I had the ability to zoom in to just demonstrate how many refrigerators, freezers, washers, dryers, ACs, anything you can consider white goods was stocked up in that. I think it was that 8-acre location there where all the material all the freon had to be drained. The refrigerators had to be cleaned out, which I got to be honest with you. I think to clean out a refrigerator after an evacuation, I'd rather be digging ditches out there than that job. That certainly is one of those micro dirty jobs that you have a situation where you evacuate, people tape up and they leave. Then when they get back, they tape up the fridge, push it to the curb. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. So that was a part of that operation as well. Hazardous stump removal. This is, and there are certain rules that identify what stumps are qualified as a hazard, where more than 50% of the root ball has to be exposed, or a tree that has to be leaning more than 30 degrees. These are all well laid out in the FEMA documentation. These are some pictures of what they call a private property debris removal program, or PPDR. These are programs that are allowed by FEMA in the most severe of circumstances, where you got little Miss Johnson there who lives in this house. This is what her backyard looks like now, and she has no means of addressing that debris, and this ultimately becomes a code enforcement, nuisance abatement type of issue, and obviously a public health and safety threat, harboring vectors and just being a threat to the community at large. And Mrs. Johnson, of course, has her son who lives in Wisconsin, can't come down. The Baptist Men's or whatever Lions Club or whoever is out there, they can't address this. And this is where you as a local government make an application to FEMA and apply for a private property debris removal program to address the debris and those hazards. These are some before and after photographs. Obviously, you have to have this documentation as part of your story that you tell, and you have to have your ordinances and photographs and all these sorts of things that demonstrate that the hazard was actually addressed. And I want you to know that we are, in all this, we are addressing hazards. We are not there to sit there with a broom and manicure a lawn like Lovey Howell and Mr. Howell wants to see. This is addressing hazards here. So I want you to keep that in mind. That's something from a constituency perspective. You have to manage those expectations that when you bring in a debris company, that they're not going to be there with the dustbuster and cleaning off every little leaf that is left on a right of way, or every twig on a piece of property. Obviously, at the end, there's going to be some ineligible debris that comes out. There's going to be some debris where contractors are trying to work on a house, they're getting paid for the disposal of a new roof, or this is some land clearing type of debris. You've got to involve your code enforcement. You've got to involve your nuisance abatement officers to identify. And there is a difference between what is actually eligible debris and ineligible debris, and oftentimes we do see this come out. From a closeout perspective, certainly this is not going to occur in the first 30 days after the disaster. Hopefully it's in the first 30 years after a disaster, where you're going to have to address your invoicing with your contractors, any sort of determine what data standards that you have, what sort of electronic communication that you can achieve, what's the process, and what sort of retainage are you going to hold. Again, I don't know how common it is on construction contract to do a holdback of 10-15% on your contracts, but I certainly recommend it in this case to be able to hold that and institute a retainage process until that contract or that invoice gets reconciled. There's the FEMA project worksheet process and appeals process. This can certainly be done in a very short period of time, or it could take months. And again, I want to just caution you that this is as much a FEMA is a public assistance, is a financing program, but it is a reimbursement program. So a lot of people are sticklers for the fact that they need you to shell out the dough for the operation and then get the money reimbursed. Now there's certainly some ways around that. There's some opportunities for you to get some advance payments based on estimates, but it does take time to for the wheels of government to work. This is a photograph of a debris site, and that was a debris site following Hurricane Ike, and this was its post-disaster condition. Once the contractor reseeded it, resodded it, all those sorts of things, and brought it back to a park again. During that project closeout, again, there's resolving damage claims, transferring the documentation, FEMA and state validations, PW closeout, and compiling of the audits. Folks, this is like a bad penny you just can't get rid of. I want to build that expectation with you that the reason we're here discussing planning is because these decisions and these operations happen in a very compressed period of time, but the questions and the audits that occur happen in a much broader span of time as well. So what we have here is really delving into the organizing, how you put together your debris management team. And we talked earlier about who to bring to the table. This is just a sampling of departments that you may want to look at. Having your GIS and your IT folks, bringing those people together and to the table is critical, because what you need to realize is that your reimbursement program is driven on road maintenance authority. If this particular road is not your responsibility from a maintenance perspective, if it's a PennDOT road, or if it's a private gated community subdivision road, or if it's a utility authority road, or if it's another jurisdiction's road, debris removal on that after disaster is not your responsibility either. So these guys, the GIS, the information, the IT folks, these guys and gals have that data. They've got the road list data, whether it might be traffic engineering where that is kept. GIS is also involved if you want to get them to provide information and data after a disaster in a geospatial environment. One thing that we've been able to see, especially with the advent of smartphones and GPS devices on just about everything you can think of, a lot of people's trucks have GPS devices or GPS-enabled trucks, and you can actually demonstrate where the vehicles are out in the field. So for me, I've seen that work very, very well, especially when council member X is saying there are no trucks in my district. that you're able to demonstrate that in the geospatial environment, give people login and access to that information, certainly provides that visibility into the operation. Bringing the F&A people, the finance and administration people, they're going to be a critical point in the process from a finance perspective, just getting the contractors paid, getting your personnel paid. Certainly, and from an administration perspective, understanding what your overtime policies are. Do you get comp time? Do you get paid for overtime? Is it in certain situations? What do your personnel policies have? And from an administrative perspective, understanding who is the key decision maker that it needs to be brought to the table during times of an emergency. Public Works and Solid Waste, 99% of the time, this is where your debris manager is going to come from. It's going to be the Solid Waste Director, Public Works Director, Streets, Drainage Director. Anybody who's going to be involved in field operations is 95% of the time going to be identified as the debris manager. So, unless you want to be voluntold what your role is going to be, I would really recommend sitting together and being a part of this planning process, because I know I've been guilty of volunteering those individuals who stepped out of the room when we were making decisions. So, having your general counsel to the table, and that really is really important, because they understand the legal responsibility, they understand what your laws are, they understand what your procurement processes are. A lot of times they understand what your condemnation procedures are. They just can keep you out of hot water, especially when your elected officials are encouraging you to just hop right into the hot water. I've certainly seen that a lot of times. So, environmental services, again, that's from coordination with Pennsylvania DEP. And sometimes when you get into some nasty situations where you have some propane or some spoiled food, bringing those oil spills, bringing those people to the table is an important piece of this. And then public information, emergency management, parks and recreation. I know I'm leaving a lot of folks off of this list, but it's better to bring more people to the table to at least provide them with the debris management 101, kind of like what we're doing here today. Bringing some situational awareness, bringing some information to them so that they understand what our collective goals are in addressing debris after a disaster. So when you put your plan together, there is some standard components to the plan. That your situations and assumptions. What are your primary hazards? Where are they located? Coordinate with your emergency manager to provide that information. Roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? Your concept of operations. Kind of walking through that concept of operations at key dates and key times. And like I did previously, trying to understand what are your milestones that you want to achieve. Because certainly, I know a lot of people who've been questioned and criticized for how they address debris and what they did have gone back and said to their naysayers, it was in my plan. I followed the plan. And a lot of people that put these plans together have a defendable case if there's a situation where somebody is unhappy with how debris was addressed. Training and exercise schedule. We do a functional exercise actually a tabletop exercise every year, just internally, so that our staff can be better prepared. We also have a number of different brown bags, if you will, on different changes to FEMA rules. You would be surprised at how much can change on a year-to-year basis with the FEMA rules that are out there, especially after big disasters like Superstorm Sandy, where you had a Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Ida, Hurricane Katrina. You always see different policies that have been issued after these disasters that will impact future disasters. After Winter Storm Packs, FEMA, this is how much I can tell you got to be aware of this type of stuff. But after Winter Storm Packs, which was February 11th of 2014. There was a disaster declaration on February 26th. There was a new FEMA policy that was issued February 25th. So it caught a lot of people by surprise, but you've got to stay up on these things. You've got a training plan, you've got to exercise your plan, and then what sort of functional annexes that you have, your contracts, your procurement procedures, all those sorts of elements of the plan, and there's certainly a lot of good information out on the web. I mean, there's a lot of good information, not only on planning, plans and approaches to plans, but there's a lot of good information on how people got it wrong as well. From Louisiana to Texas, to Jersey to Florida, there's certainly the horror stories out there that really got me going and really gets a lot of other communities going as well. When you put your plan together, you've got to identify those priority roads. A lot of communities already have, based on their snow, their snow routes, what their priorities are. So a lot of folks use that as their debris priorities as well. Your debris management site identifications, finding that open tract of land that can serve, serve in that capacity. What sort of collection zones? Do you have brush and bulky collection zones that you already use and people are conditioned to understand? Do people know their council member districts? Do people know what side of the tracks they live on? I don't know, but there are a lot of there are if you can break up your community to demonstrate that there is progress, it goes a long way with folks and providing them with assurances that yes, we're engaged and we're moving forward. Road maintenance responsibilities, final disposal plans, job aids, checklists. I certainly carry my laminated one and knowing what I need to do after a disaster to support the clients that we have. Emergency policies. What are your emergency policies for debris management sites? And I believe that there was some information passed out at the front as far as citing those. Confirming your time and materials documentation plan. If you do engage contractors, how are you going to document this? And confirming those emergency policies as well. Again, I talked about this GIS information and your road lists. Really, everything does go back to road maintenance responsibilities. And a lot of people may not fully realize that or appreciate that. They feel like every road in their community is their problem, and it's not. And it really matters as who's got normal responsibility for that particular road, and that's what drives this. In your ConOps plan, you talk about those emergency push. Who's going to do your windshield assessments, your aerial assessments? Have you performed any sort of damage assessment training out there to understand how big is big, how bad is bad? Is it your public works teams? Is it your librarians? Who's going to be, what essential personnel is going to be deployed to the area to bring back that information to the EOC so that you can make better decisions and informed decisions about how you're going to address the debris. Making those planning that phase 2, acceptable duration of pickups, an estimated volume of trucks. How many trucks do you need? Understanding what kind of trucks do you have on hand? And are they 8 cubic yard rock trucks? Because folks, that's going to take forever. If you plan on addressing a 100,000 cubic yard disaster or more with 8 cubic yard rock trucks, it's going to take a long time. That's why a lot of these debris haulers, they bring in 30, 40, 50 cubic yard, monster garage logging vehicles from out of state, or maybe some of them from this area, to address the debris in a very short period of time. Because it's a pretty simple equation. You estimate how much debris is out there, you figure out how many trucks you have, you figure 5, 6 loads per day on a good day without traffic, and you multiply how much that truck can carry, and you come up with how many loads per day. And folks, I'll tell you, 36 hours without sleep, I mean, that is a yeoman's effort, but doing this for 2 weeks, doing this for 3 weeks, a month, working 7 days a week, I know guys and gals appreciate the overtime, but at some time, they're going to cry uncle and their productivity is going to slip, and you're still going to be dealing with a massive debris operation. The transitioning to recovery. You know, I actually had a guy down in Texas, he asked me one time, you know, what is that period, or how do you define when you move from the response phase to the recovery phase? And I had no idea until he informed me that it's when people start asking, how the hell are we going to pay for all this? And that is really what that transition means is, okay, conducting the meetings, you know, doing the public information, public notices, designating your debris hotline numbers, agreeing upon stuff, getting into, these are all in the weeds type of things that you need to think about. You know, again, I don't know how the light switch comes on and off other than when I flip it. But there's a lot of people worried about, you know, the back end, getting that electricity to make sure that light switch works. I have no idea how my email gets to my iPhone, but I know it does. And there's folks out there that like worrying about this type of stuff. I am not one of those people, but you know, get somebody who really is familiar with this, who can read up, who can phone up on this information, and charge them with this process. Your right-of-way collection, everything from vegetative debris, plan for the multitude of hazards. It's not just going to be a woody event, it's not just going to be a tree event, but it could include construction and demolition debris, household hazardous wastes, white goods, refrigerators, ACs, I mean, the gambit. It could be vessels, vehicles. I dealt with a project in Louisiana one time where it was after Hurricane Gustav, actually, in Sayreville Parish, where they had 150 vessels that were titled that were across the area. Tim, I know you're familiar with the project in New Jersey where you had a lot of waterway debris, and understanding, you know, what are your processes for titled vehicles or titled objects like vessels and vehicles? What are your standards for removing them and then placing them for a 30-day period or 45-day period prior to the owner the opportunity? Because Lord knows you can't just go get it and crush it and send it to the landfill. And there you have to look at those waste streams and what are the legal rules that oversee those, how you handle them. Your public information, you got to have some of those, you know, these key bits of information ready to go, canned off the shelf. Just like some of these the policies that we've heard about earlier, having this information, because folks, I am guilty of living in a 180 character world, and I get, you know, my information in small bits and pieces. Maybe that's you know, being deployed to 16 disasters in a short period of time, and still trying to manage somewhat of a resemblance of a home life. But I can barely see this information. I think a lot of people are busy out there, and people are getting conditioned to this. So it's not just the messaging, but it's the medium as well. You know, providing information. Do not place debris near water vaults, fire hydrants. That's people's favorite place, right on top of the water meter, or right on top of the electric meter, to put a big pile of debris. And I think it's a terrible place to put debris, to be honest with you. But don't mix your household hazardous waste. Getting that information out, because again, people may not be as familiar with this as you really think they are. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. We are at 11:45, so if you have any questions about the planning process, I would love to take those now. Yeah.
Yeah, how many communities that you've been to actually have pre-identified debris sites? Like, what, if you could just, off the top of your head, like, ballpark, how many do that?
I would say of the clients so an actual like debris management site plan, I'd say probably close to 25%. I'd say close to 75% have thought about it. Hey, we're going to do it in a ball field, or hey, we've got some public works land, a rodeo type of area where we train. We've got some land at a transfer station. A lot of times it's too small. In some high-growth communities, a lot of times it's now a mini mart or a strip mall or something like that. So or sometimes people don't realize it's in a floodplain or a floodway, because that's where the cheapest land was that was purchased at some time, and that's where the soccer fields are, that sort of thing. So again, I'd say more or less that percentage. Yes.
Do you find that the FEMA process using cubic yards slows down the process of recycling, because you're developing your yards and then you're not quick to grind it up because they want evidence of the cubic yards, versus using tub grinders right away to reduce the volume?
Okay, so cubic yards versus a tonnage-based
Right,
system?
I'm using tonnage bases now versus cubic yards on the debris removal program because it was more effective.
Okay, no, that's a great question. So whether to use cubic yards versus tons. Well, first of all, I'll back up and just say, when you do put a contract in place, using a unit of measure like a cubic yard or a ton is a must. Going with the time and materials on an hourly basis, not quantifying how much material is a big no-no. You certainly can use lump sum contracts if you have finite scopes of work, but mainly those are the two most commonly accepted. So I just want to back up and make sure everybody understood that. Why would we talk cubic yards and tons? The second thing, the issue that I face with tonnage is if you don't have the proper infrastructure in place, that it's often very difficult to mobilize rapidly. If you saw the pictures of the cubic yardage where you're just pretty much putting up a deer blind type of deal, and that can happen in a few days or a few hours, it's much more difficult to obtain the mobile scales and the calibration of those scales. Now again, that's not to say if you are using a pre-existing landfill site and you have the throughput capacity to not impact your operation, but if you're taking it to are you using an actual field and you're putting mobile scales there, or how are you?
Let me preface it by saying that it's a whole in-house operation through our township.
Okay.
And what we did was we were finding the trucks were waiting on the scales too long, so we took our first 30 loads, averaged the weight, and from now on they don't go on the scales, and we just have a set weight going across, and then they grind right away.
Oh, okay.
So we're using triaxles. So we go in and we were finding the first 30 loads average 2550. It was very light,
yeah.
25,050. So from then on we use that as the number of loads and then average weight. So we could.
And that was with your force account labor and equipment.
Correct.
So I would say utilizing that strategy for your own internal crews is a much probably more palatable solution than versus utilizing that method to estimate contractors' costs. So for your own, if that's going to work, I see what you did. You kind of came up with some averages and said, coming up with this loose debris, they're coming in at this, and that's how we're going to quantify it. I certainly could defend that right there.
When it satisfied FEMA is the more important thing now, because I've set up this type of a model in the township now. Now, we know we never got the grant money for FEMA restitution. Yeah. Would that process satisfy FEMA?
For your own, now are you paying anybody at any point during this process?
Well, yeah, the tracks or dump trucks, yes.
Those are contracted?
They're contract trucks.
Okay, so excuse me, I thought those were your own trucks.
We have a mix of the dump trucks.
Okay, so yes, I think it certainly would be a point of contention with FEMA relative to your contracted crews. And I'll say this is that you've got to have those contracted crews having a finite. You got to have your tear weights and your fully loaded weights as well, and that has to be documented on every load. So if you want to reduce your throughput by diverting your own public works trucks around the scales and coming up with an average, because you're not being compensated based on what their volume is, but it's more of a backup documentation perspective. That's defendable, although it's preferable to actually get, trip tickets on every single load.
See, we're not paying them by the load, it's by the day.
Oh, you have day rates?
Day rates.
Yeah. I certainly would tell you that to be on the safe side, to have an actual scale weight on every single load is probably going to be the easiest for the FEMA person to get their arms wrapped around, or the state person to get their arms wrapped around. The methodology that you're proposing, I think that's going to take some convincing of the FEMA staff, just to make sure that they feel comfortable with the methodology that you're using. I mean, I would say if you're gonna sit there and put a plan together, it might be more beneficial and more risk averse is to just come up with a plan to obtain a set of mobile scales and move it that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Matt?
Yeah, so I don't know if other communities have seen this or how common this is, but so you talked about the curbside collection process and the idea of separating, and a few folks here have been involved in our planning conversations in the city, and the streets department has told us how it's pretty much an impossible task in an urban area to expect people to, separate trash curbside. They said they're throwing stuff everywhere as it is. So in Hurricane Sandy, I don't know how common this is that they would do this, but they actually looked at the statistics from the transfer stations with Waste Management, and they looked at the historical difference between a normal week, and they saw the spike in garbage, and they basically assumed that was storm related, and they gave the city reimbursement for that. But I don't know how common that is. But the numbers they were very convinced by all low tickets and the documentation they had from the transfer stations to justify that. But we're still working through this. I don't know what thoughts you have on that and whether this is common or not. I mean, I've told them to assume probably not, that this may have just been a one-time thing, but I don't know.
So to pick up loads of debris off of the curb, I gotta tell, I mean, it is the easiest way, it's the most efficient way of addressing a tremendous public health and safety threat, is to advise citizens to bring it out on the curb, to do their best. And again, that one photograph of nice neat piles of waste. I mean, come on, that was for effect only. If you're lucky to get a wood pile and an everything else pile, and a couple of refrigerators and freezers, because I'll tell you, those don't last very long. I mean, anything with a salvage value, I see is something that doesn't make it on the curb, for a short period of time. But if you can convince people to just put a wood pile and an everything else pile, that's half the battle. Diverting that woody waste, I think if you can divert the woody waste from your waste stream, that's a win in my book. But I'll tell you. Certainly giving those residents an option to self-haul. I don't know if it's around here where, in Texas, the stereotype's true, everybody everybody pretty much has a pickup truck. That you can pretty much walk down the street and, that's the case. So a lot of people do self-haul, so giving residents that option to self-haul at the transfer station is something we see a lot of communities that utilize, but it has to, I see that the most beneficial way of using that is in conjunction with a curbside program, because there's a lot of people out there that just don't have the resources and means, and they can barely make it out to the front steps if their basement got flooded, much less load it in a pickup and drive it somewhere. But from a reimbursement perspective, I would say yes. We've seen cases where FEMA's taken the delta of your normal throughput of your landfill or your transfer station and normalized it on a 3-year basis, or did some sort of math magician type deal. I mean, where where they'll look at that delta and they'll reimburse you for that, and advise that you have the documentation. Maybe you can hold your tongue about your FEMA question. I know you're going to
say during Hurricane Floyd with the top grinders and FEMA.
Yeah.
Well, the easy way around it was shop Raudenbush, since we just hired Waste Management dumpsters, we grinded everything, put it in waste management dumpsters, waste management hauls it away, and there's your weight slip, you're done, there's all the documentation you need, is done, and we saved a ton of money and time with the tub grinders versus trying to haul stuff here and there, and it was a nightmare, but waste management can help you haul away anything you need to get hauled away and give you any kind of documentation that you need, especially for FEMA, and we've had no problems. We've utilized them for 5 schools now.
And use the dumpster program?
Yes. 30 yarders, and then, we just make our little spots normally at our firehouses, sometimes at our public works facility, and residents can go, and then our crews that are out in the area is gonna drive from one area up to town all the way back down to the public works facility. There's 2 spots in between where they can go. It just saves time and manpower.
So they use like a residential drop-off, people
If people want to take it there, they take it there. If they want to call us, we pick it up and we take it to the dumpster. But the bottom line is waste management's hauling it all the way and they're handling our weight slips.
Okay.
So our documentation for FEMA is golden.
Oh yeah, no, and
Never had a problem. Never, not once.
that's fantastic, and utilizing kind of a dual methodology like that, where you've got, it sounds like there's a dumpster set on the community, but then there's a hotspot type of hotline number that they can call and say, I can't get it to X location, can you come pick it up? And then you document it that way, and then putting it in a dumpster, and then it goes away is certainly a strategy. And again, I would say that's definitely a strategy I've seen successfully employed in 10, 20, 30,000 cubic yard disasters. I think would make it a higher order. You may see some challenge. I don't know how big disasters that you've seen. Floyd, yeah.
Floyd was bigger for us.
Yeah. One thing I would just say is that certainly a lot of people, and I saw this in Hurricane Irene in 2011 in North Carolina, where a lot of people had experiences with their big disaster was Hurricane Hugo. It occurred in 94, 93. And that was 20 years later, or 2001, something along those lines. And their experience with FEMA was completely different in 2011 versus that period. So it sounds like you had 5 disasters. So you've got a lot of experience.
Kind of by water on 3 sides. So
Oh, really? Okay.
Because we have a lot of trees that they go down a lot, and they go down, and power lines come with them, and it just begins.
So you had a lot of experience, different experiences through the years with
Hurricane Floyd with FEMA was wonderful. It was all the paperwork was pretty much the same, but it was all by hand, and they were great.
Yeah.
And then Irene was kind of like Root now, and then we hit, and then they fined the 2, and that was awful. And Hurricane Sandy's still ongoing.
Yeah.
Still being audited to this day.
Yeah.
It just never ends. And it's just piles of paperwork that never go away. That just makes me crazy.
But certainly your sentiment is shared by a lot of people that to work with. Tim, do you have a question?
I was just going to ask, with the variety of local government agencies that you were advocating to come to the table in the planning process, how does a public works director make that happen?
That's a great question. I definitely see a lot of public works disasters, and I'll use this example. A lot of times, folks in the public works and emergency management space, it's kind of like me, joining a gym, where they, especially engaging with the emergency management staff, a lot of people are just unfamiliar with the planning process. They may not have gotten that ICS training that is required. They may just be unfamiliar. And taking that first step in and seeing the bodybuilders there, pumping iron and get intimidated by it. And so I think that's the first step. Is I've seen a lot of people hesitate because they are intimidated by understanding unified command versus versus a lot of the, ICS. I mean, a lot of the NIMS terms that you just need to be more comfortable with. So I think that's the first step. And then, the second step is a lot of times the best planning, unfortunately, is reactive. And I've seen a lot of communities who've seen the community next door and seeing the horror stories, going to your APWA conventions, I mean, and engaging and getting some of these great stories from, just across the river here in New Jersey, a lot of what they had to go through, because a lot of their contracting and a lot of their planning was done on the fly, led by the DEP, led by, groups like Ocean County who quickly, came to the call and wanted to address debris. So I think those becoming just more familiar, and maybe that's why a lot of people are afraid of it, or they hear the horror stories of FEMA. But I mean, I think the best strategy is to just see what's out there, self-educate, put the plan, bring the people to the planning table, and just understanding the financial challenges that I think you may face with paying for this disaster, because I mean, this is in the millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. I don't know how much the state of New Jersey, following the waterway, at one point I thought it was going to be $250 million to, I don't know what the final tally on that program was, but I mean, it's a very, very expensive process, and there's just so many facets to it that you need to take a look at. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things we ran into was FEMA deducting for example, scrap metal. They were saying, well, you're going to turn that in and get a profit for it. And the trees, you're going to put through your tub grinder and you're going to get it as mulch and you're going to sell it. So we're going to deduct the profit you're going to get off of what we're giving you back. Is that common, or? And that was just this last time. Did you ever do that before?
So that's a great question. It has to do with recycle and salvage value of materials. And I would say the first thing you need to be clear on is the ownership of the debris. Who actually owns the debris? Because a lot of contractors will take ownership of the debris in order to pass on a cheaper cost to load and haul it. But at the end of the day, hey, it's my debris. I get to flow control it, or I get to control where the market occurs, and so you never see a bill. Or if you do, it's a pass through to a landfill, but you as a responsible party, or you as the local government, the applicant, you don't have control of that material. Now there's some contracts in some communities that want to take ownership of the debris. They want to be responsible for it. It's your cost. And in that case, then yes, you have the ability under the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act and the Public Assistance Alternate Procedures Program to benefit from that, benefit from the salvage value of the white goods, the materials, or the wood. But that has to be demonstrated. I mean, you have to be able to take it to International Paper, or you've got to take it to some mill that's going to use it for boiler fuel, and they're going to pay you $2 a yard or $2 a ton or whatever it is. And that has to be demonstrated. That value has to be realized, and it can't just be assumed that you're going to make money off of it, which I think is the part that really needs to be discussed with the personnel, is what's actual versus anticipated value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, certainly there's you can, and if you want to be the party that finds a market for this material, by all means. I mean, there is a market. Unfortunately, after a big disaster, you have a glut on the market, and that really drives your prices down, and it makes you have to send it further away. But I mean, I've seen debris sent as overseas over to Italy to be used in their boilers there. That's as far as I've seen it, as far as steps to divert it from the waste stream. So.